Macron leaves EU Parliament during Orban's speech. Strasbourg, September 16, 2025. An unusual incident occurred at the European Parliament on Tuesday. French President Emmanuel Macron left the chamber during a speech by Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban. Observers are calling it a symbolic moment in a period when the European Union is under pressure, both internally and externally. Orban's appearance in the EU Parliament. Viktor Orban spoke on September 16th at the plenary hall of the EU Parliament in Strasbourg. The Hungarian Prime Minister used his speech to sharply criticize the political course of the European Union. He specifically addressed the EU's support for Ukraine, which he called expensive and ineffective. He also accused European institutions of having lost contact with citizens. Orban advocated for negotiations and a diplomatic solution to the conflict rather than continuing the current strategy. During his speech, he mentioned several European politicians by name, including Emmanuel Macron. Shortly afterward, the French president stood up and left the chamber. Cameras captured the departure, which was immediately picked up on social media and by international media. France's domestic situation. The incident comes at a difficult time for Macron domestically. 1 week earlier, on September 9th, the French government had resigned following a failed confidence vote. Although the new Prime Minister, Sébastien Lecornu, temporarily assumed office, political instability persisted. At the same time, France faces a tense economic situation. Rising prices, weak growth, and declining investments have led to growing public dissatisfaction. Protest movements such as the Air Block Everything group and the renewed mobilization of the Yellow Vests have caused blockades and demonstrations for weeks. For Macron, who in recent years had presented himself as one of the leading figures of European integration, this domestic crisis represents a significant strain on his international ability to act. Orban's position. Orban is using the weakness of his European partners to strengthen his own position. On September 7th, he had already declared in Budapest that a pro-European government in Hungary would lead the country into chaos. He once again presented himself as a defender of national sovereignty and opposed what he considers excessive interference from Brussels. In the European Union Parliament, he repeated this argument. He called for the EU to rethink its policy toward Ukraine, saying that the current course is economically unsustainable. His statements received mixed reactions in the chamber. Support from Central and Eastern European parliamentarians. Sharp criticism from Western and Northern European members. Reactions in Europe. The scene in Strasbourg did not go unnoticed. In Warsaw and Bratislava, politicians expressed sympathy for Orban's position and called for a debate on financial aid to Ukraine. His speech also drew attention in Rome. Representatives close to the Italian government said his words reflected concerns shared in many countries. In Berlin, government officials emphasized the need for European unity and reaffirmed support for Ukraine. At the same time, diplomats reported internal discussions about the sustainability of the current strategy. For France, the incident was particularly sensitive. Several European media outlets interpreted Macron's departure as a sign of weakness. Political observers noted that Paris is increasingly losing influence in Brussels. Symbolic significance of the incident. Whether Macron left the chamber in protest or for tactical reasons initially remained unclear. Official statements from Paris only mentioned that the president had an urgent appointment. Nevertheless, the moment quickly became symbolic. A president leaves the chamber while his name is criticized. That is an image that sticks, said an EU diplomat on the sidelines of the session. France's role in the EU. Since taking office in 2017, Macron had tried to position France as a driver of European integration. With initiatives to strengthen the Eurozone, proposals for a common defense policy, and an active role in supporting Ukraine, he had long been seen as a driving force. However, the current crises are significantly weakening his position. Political instability in France, ongoing protests, and the difficult economic situation have damaged his reputation at home and abroad. In Brussels, there is now open debate over whether Paris can still assume the role it traditionally held. France has always been a guarantor of European capacity to act, said a senior official, but at the moment, French policy appears blocked. Orban's growing influence. Orban, on the other hand, is succeeding in influencing the debate in Europe more strongly. With his repeated calls for a change in Ukraine policy, he is reaching an audience beyond Hungary, especially in countries that are themselves struggling with the economic consequences of the crisis. His arguments are resonating. Several Eastern European governments are now calling for an honest assessment of the current strategy. In Southern Europe, discussions about the burdens of aid packages are also increasing. European unity on trial. The incident in the EU Parliament highlights tensions within the Union. While countries like France and Germany push for the continuation of the current course, other states demand adjustments or at least a discussion of the financial and political costs. The images of Macron's departure symbolize, in the eyes of many observers, this growing division. On one side, a France struggling for stability. On the other, a Hungary confidently presenting its criticism. Outlook. The coming weeks will likely show the consequences of the incident for European politics. In France, the new government under Prime Minister Lecornu must first restore domestic stability. At the same time, pressure is growing on Macron to regain his leadership role in Europe. For Orban, the scene represents a prestige gain. His criticism is increasingly being heard, and he positions himself as the spokesperson for countries dissatisfied with the current direction of the EU. Whether this will lead to a fundamental change of course, or the EU will maintain its current line remains open. What is clear, however, is that September the 16th, 2025, in Strasbourg showed a union in which old certainties are being shaken. Conclusion. Emmanuel Macron's departure during Viktor Orban's speech was a moment of high symbolic significance, with effects reaching far beyond the EU Parliament chamber. It highlights the tensions shaping Europe in autumn 2025. The contrast between supporters of deeper integration and those insisting on national sovereignty, between governments that want to continue heavily supporting Ukraine and voices calling for a reorientation. Whether the Strasbourg scene is merely a footnote in the hectic political landscape or the beginning of a deeper shift in power within Europe will only become clear in the coming months. What is certain is that the European Union faces the task of proving its unity. At a time when domestic crises and international conflicts are pulling it in multiple directions.